Good day, everyone. Thank you for your patience. We had a bit of a technical glitch, and we may continue to experience technical glitches along the way. So currently, I am hosting the slides and will be running them manually as our guest speaks to them today. So we'll see how that works. In the case that everything fails and we're not able to continue this webinar in an appropriate fashion, then we will have to postpone it, use a different technology, and send you an update about when and where that's going to happen. So without further ado, let me kick this off. Good day, everyone, and welcome to this Lightbend webinar for February 21st, 2019, titled A Glimpse at the Future of Apache Spark 3.0 with Deep Learning and Kubernetes. My name is Oliver White, Chief Storyteller and MC at Lightbend, and I'm happy to welcome today's special guest, Holden Karau. Holden is a frequent conference speaker. We've got some great videos of her on the Scala Days website, for example. A world traveler, author of Learning Spark and High Performance Spark, and when she's not doing all that stuff, she's a developer advocate at Google. As I introduce the rest of the session and let everyone get settled in, I'd like to ask our audience a very quick poll question about what production technologies you are using on your project. As you know, Spark has been on a pretty fast ride from obscurity just a handful of years ago to the fastest growing Apache project to date. The company founded by the creators of Spark, Databricks, just received a $2.75 billion valuation. So it's clear that Spark is going places, and the question we're looking at today is, are you coming along for the ride? And this is why we're so lucky to have Holden join us today. As an expert on Spark, she'll help us understand the new features promised in 3.0 with a walk through some of the interesting JIRAs, plus a look at external components being developed like support for deep learning, and also look at the future of running real-time Spark workloads on Kubernetes and the integration paths in that area. Now, as Holden will be the first to say, some of this is almost certainly disprovable in the future, but regardless, let's come and join in the fun parts of technology speculation, and when it's over, maybe you can help out with a code review or two in the area of your interest. Thank you for taking our poll. As always, today's webinar is made possible only by people like you encouraging your company to become a Lightbend subscriber, like our excellent client Zalando, who is Europe's largest online fashion retailer. They're looking for a talented back-end engineer in Berlin with experience in Scala, Java, Kubernetes, and other technologies. You can find out more about this position and other open positions with Lightbend customers on our newly designed website under the About tab. As always, this webinar will be recorded and shared with you next week. And if you have any questions for Holden today, add them to the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll see if we can get around to them in the Q&A part of today's session if this all goes to plan. So without further ado, let's hand it over to Holden Karau. Thank you so much for joining us today, Holden, and apologies for the technical difficulties that we were dealing with.
Oh, no worries. It's the joys of running Linux on my laptop.
Yay.
Yay. Yeah. So I want to be really clear. This is the possible future. The joys of open source software development means that my crystal ball is perhaps not perfect, and we'll look at some of the ways that you can build your own crystal ball and maybe get into arguments with me on Twitter about what the future looks like. So let's keep on rolling to the next slide. So yeah, my name is Holden. My preferred pronouns are she or her. Most of this was already covered. For those of you who are interested in open source specifically, one of the things that I've started doing is code review live streams. In fact, I did one just before this webinar got started, just looking at some of the PRs into Apache Spark. And I think it's interesting because you can sort of see how large projects like Spark handle code reviews, and it can sort of give you an idea of what maintainers are looking at when we're working on that stuff. Can go to the next slide. Cool. What will be covered? So we're going to talk about some of the constraints on predicting the future in open source, a little bit about the current state of Spark, mostly focusing on the new things in Spark 3, how to build your own crystal ball, look at some JIRAs. I'll try and convince you to help us with code reviews, and then we'll settle down to some Q&A. The look through JIRA will be really interesting because there's a good chance that I'll just crash, and we'll see how that goes. Okay, yeah, so predicting the future in open source is hard. So I work on Spark. I'm a PMC member, but that doesn't necessarily mean that just because I think something is going to happen in Spark, it will actually happen. Other people have to do the work. In addition to other people having to do the work, other people have to come on and spend the time to review PRs. We have over 400 open pull requests. There's no way that I can review all of those. And even if I could, we still have to reach a consensus. That is, we all have to agree on what decision we're going in. And sometimes consensus decision-making can be surprising because you'll find people with views that you weren't aware they had. That being said, while we don't have a crystal ball, we have JIRA, and we have a developer mailing list, and we have code reviews. And by looking in those three places, we can get sort of some hints as to where things are going. Okay. Walk ahead to the next slide. So what are some of the key themes for Spark 3? So deep learning, it turns out venture capital money, as previously discussed, the Databricks folks have raised a bunch of venture capital money. This is maybe a little cynical of me, but I think VC dollars are truly driving a lot of investment here. Deep learning is a really great system for telling if something is a cat or not, and we can generalize it to other places as well, but it still exceeds at if something is a cat or not, which, as you can see from my slides, is something I care about a lot. So Kubernetes, if all the cool kids have replaced their scheduler, would you do that too? And it turns out the answer for most people is yes, and also see above VC money. There's other reasons why Kubernetes is exciting. Traditionally, Spark has been deployed on top of Yarn for the most part, and while Yarn is a really great scheduler, the only jobs that have really been on Yarn for the most part have been data workloads, and Kubernetes is coming from a very different place, and so you're seeing Kubernetes clusters that are able to more effectively share resources. And we might do some nice things with Scala language support. We might not. But we definitely will remove a bunch of deprecated APIs. And this makes me incredibly happy. It might make you a little bit sad. Now's the time, if you're a Spark user, to actually read your deprecation warnings, because those things are probably going away for real. And if the migration guide that you get with these deprecation warnings isn't enough for you to actually be able to migrate your workloads, we really want you to speak up now so that we can provide you with a reasonable migration path in Spark 3. You know, certainly the Spark developers, all of the workloads that we work on will be reasonably well supported in Spark 3, but the community is so much broader than the people who work on Spark itself that we might miss out on some workloads. So if there's important things that we're deprecating, we really want you to tell us if it's not possible for you to migrate, so we can catch those problems slightly earlier. So on to our next slide on deep learning. So the important question is, does this slide have a cat? If you are a deep learning algorithm, I hope the answer is yes. If you are not a deep learning algorithm, I can understand if it would take you a minute. The answer is yes. So what is happening to support deep learning in Spark? So you have been able to do deep learning on top of Spark for a while. There's TensorFlow on Spark and other projects like this, but there's been some pretty significant challenges. Around the scheduler is one of the bigger ones. Spark has a very unique resilience model that is recompute on failure, and that works really well. The only problem is for things like the deep learning model training, if we lose one partition in the middle of training your deep learning job and we just try and recompute that individual one partition, TensorFlow or your favorite deep learning system here isn't going to be very happy about that approach to trying to do that training. So we need to have a different scheduler that understands this. The other one is, as mentioned, deep learning is mostly about cat photos. And Spark's data types are really not focused on image data. And so there's been some extensions happening to better support cat photos. This could also be generalized to other kinds of photos that are not necessarily cats. But I do ask you, why would you want to do that? We can study cats. And then better interchange to support deep learning. This is something that's pretty exciting to me because I also work to support the Python community in Spark. I know this is Lightbend webinar, but I support both sides. And the better interchange stuff has been happening very much in the Python world, and I think we can use some of this power to help speed up our deep learning tasks. And then the last point is, why are there no deep learning algorithms in Spark? And we'll talk about that as well. So let's go ahead and look at what this new scheduler is. There was an announcement about it back around Spark 2.3. It was going to be called the new gang scheduler. However, if you go and you grep the code base for that word, oh, I misspelled the word gang. That's probably why I didn't find any results. Anyways, it's not called the gang scheduler in the code right now. So we'll click forward one more to the happy one. And it's actually called the barrier schedule. So we have the RDD barrier suite, and this is happiness. There is a JIRA for it. You can see it's still in progress. There is some of it that's been merged in. And there's a design document if anyone really wants to dig deep into this. There's a message. Okay, Lightbend is a major committer to Spark, by the way. Yes, actually, that's true. One of the things that Lightbend has done some excellent work on, just on a side note, is supporting newer versions of Scala in Spark. We just didn't make any progress on that for a while, and the Lightbend folks came in and did some amazing work there. But yeah, so back to the new scheduler. This new scheduler gives us the ability to do some cool things. We'll go to the next slide where we talk about this. And it allows scheduling for all of the deep learning job together, which is what we have to do to actually be successful, right? If we try and train TensorFlow one partition at a time, it's not very happy. TensorFlow distributed training requires that it has all of the partitions available to it at the same time. And it also allows intermixing with regular scheduling. So it's not like you have to use this one scheduler always. The other one is Spark's method of handling failures, while really great, is not necessarily perfect for deep learning. And so if we lose a executor during the deep learning training, we rerun the training when we're in the gang scheduler. Okay, so up next. So what do the, okay, next slide. Happiness, yay. So Spark deep learning pipelines. So this is the ML pipelines being extended to better support images of cats. Now, there's the Databricks Spark Deep Learning project on GitHub over here. There's also a lot of things that are happening, being merged back into Spark. There's other approaches to deep learning on Spark, I want to be clear. These different libraries don't necessarily use the same primitives that are happening in Spark, although I think with Spark 3, we'll see more of these libraries start to implement the same primitives, and then we'll be able to switch between the libraries like we have with Spark ML, where we can try out different algorithms without having to change our data formats around. But for now, there hasn't been that standardization, but I think in Spark 3, we'll start to see that with more of the Spark deep learning pipeline stuff being merged in. I want to be clear, one of the things which isn't being merged in are the deep learning algorithms themselves, right? We don't see TensorFlow support going into Spark Core itself. Rather, we see that stuff living in external libraries. And this is a bit of a change from how Spark ML was built. Spark ML was built to be extensible, but we also provided a collection of algorithms inside of SparkML itself. However, this created sort of a first-class, second-class situation where algorithms inside of Spark were seen as good, even if they were perhaps more of a reference implementation than necessarily good. So I think it's very reasonable for us to not be merging the deep learning algorithms into Spark itself, and rather leaving that up to packages. And hopefully this will allow the packages to compete on more of an equal footing, and you can explore them as you want. On the downside, this does mean that it's up to you to figure out which packages are the right fit, and we don't necessarily have an easy way to tell you which ones are like up to date, and so that's going to be some burden on you. Sorry about that. But let's go ahead and talk about something new and fun and exciting maybe instead. Right. So one of the things that might happen, and this is more of a maybe, but I think it's pretty likely, is we've started using Apache Arrow, which is a really wonderful project for improving the interchange between Java and Python. And that's really great. Apache Arrow is a really good message format, or data format, sorry, for copying data between different VMs. But not only does it support Java and Python, TensorFlow can now read Arrow data in. CUDA can read Arrow data in. And I think one of the opportunities that we have that hasn't happened yet, but I'm hoping is going to happen for Spark 3, is we might start to see Arrow being used for some of the Spark deep learning pipeline stuff. I did an interesting proof of concept with this, so it's totally doable. The code was just not really all that pretty at the time, but I suspect someone with more time on their hands will come up with a usable implementation as opposed to the kind of janky one that I did. You want to do some cool deep learning stuff, but don't actually want to do deep learning. Here's a chance to do that instead. So, okay, that's deep learning. That's figuring out pictures of cats. That's fun. But we need to run on other cluster managers. So let's talk about Kubernetes, which is yeah, great. So it's for more than just big data. If you're not super familiar with Kubernetes, that's really great. It'll get a lot better. It's getting a lot better as time goes on. Spark's support for Kubernetes is relatively fresh, would be the polite expression. It's very difficult to use right now in production, but on the plus side, a lot of companies have large Kubernetes deployments that they want to run Spark on top of. And many of these companies are active in the open source community, and they're collaborating together on this, and that's really promising. Spark on Kubernetes was probably one of the more active sort of forks for a while. It's been merged back into master, but it's a good sign that there's a lot of people working on this. So what do I mean by difficult to use? Next slide. Yay, okay. So dynamic scaling. And so this is, I think, actually really super relevant for Kubernetes clusters. For Yarn clusters, dynamic scaling, it's cool, but fundamentally your Yarn cluster is probably not scaling the underlying resources all that quickly. Whereas Kubernetes clusters, the hosted solutions from my employer, GKE, and other companies have really nice built-in underlying dynamic scaling, which will actually scale the underlying instances. And so being able to dynamically scale your usage of instances or certain containers makes a big difference in the total cost of running your application, not just being a good neighbor to other people from your company. Right now, though, enabling dynamic scaling is way too much work. You have to manually deploy the shuffle service, and the shuffle service is not really all that easy to deploy. There is a new shuffle service for Spark on Kubernetes being proposed. It looks a lot better, and that's really exciting. Another point is that right now, there's some really cool tools in Spark Submit, which will just, if you reference a jar, or you reference a local Python file, or you reference whatever dependency you have, it will automatically upload it to HDFS, and then the workers it will automatically download from HDFS. It's really cool, but Kubernetes doesn't necessarily have HDFS. In fact, normally you don't see HDFS deployed on Kubernetes. So that sort of built-in automatic upload thing hasn't been working. There's, on the branch, there was an approach that was being maintained. It's not the approach that they've decided to move forward with, so they're having to build something new. It's going to take a little bit of time, but I think we'll see in Spark 3, you won't have to manually be uploading your JIRAs to Google Cloud Storage or S3 or whatever it is that you're using. I think the tools will automate that, and I'm really excited for that because I have shell scripts right now that automate that, and whenever I can replace shell scripts with code that someone else wrote, my life gets a lot less scary. Better auth integration. Yeah. Kerberos is a reality for many of us, for better or worse. And unfortunately, doing Kerberos right is really challenging. And doing that right inside of Yarn is a little bit easier because there's mechanisms for doing token delegation refreshes and all of those wonderful things, which aren't necessarily quite as well set up with Spark on Kubernetes just yet. But there's people working on it, right? Because the people that want to use Spark on Kubernetes also care a lot about authentication. One of the common sort of areas where we're lacking is the documentation. We have things like, if you want to do this, you will need to change your firewall settings in some way. And we could maybe be a little bit clearer about what some way means. One of the things which I would really like to see, and I think we're likely to see given the corresponding investments in deep learning, is job resource requirement tagging. And this is really important for those of you who are running in systems where you maybe want to do your data prep on top of, it's just regular CPUs, but you're deep learning, you want to use GPUs or TPUs. And I think we need to do some more work here to do that. Packaging dependencies that are not managed by Java is a challenge in all of Spark's deployment options. Right now, Spark on Kubernetes is better than Spark on Yarn for doing this, in my opinion. That's a matter of personal opinion. But if you work with junior data scientists, asking them to go ahead and build a Docker container doesn't always go super well. And I think we could offer some good tooling there. And I think that's also definitely in the works. So I think this is really exciting because it means it'll be easier for people who need to depend on sort of native dependencies or Python dependencies. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. Right. So now we're going to talk about where my crystal ball came from, how to build your own crystal ball, and take a look at some of the things which I use to make my assumptions. We'll go to the next slide. Should have really put crystal ball on that slide. Anyways, so the first thing is there is a developer list. It's a good thing to subscribe to if you're interested in seeing what people are planning with Spark. One of the areas where we always need help is triaging issues. Sean Owen does an amazing job on a lot of this, but not just him, right? Not just one person can triage all the issues. And one of the things that you can do if you help triage issues is you'll get a better idea of what kind of things people are planning on doing in Spark, because you get to see that sort of raw, unfiltered issue stream, some of which is feature improvements, some of which are just bugs. Reviewing code is another great way to get an idea of what's going on in Spark. Spark-prs.appspot.com gives you this really nice per component view of Spark. So if you're only interested in changes happening within a certain component, you can just go ahead and click in on that one section, and you'll just see PRs coming in that area. And I also have live streams where I review code, and if you want to watch that, you can check out my YouTube channel. So we can try going into JIRA. We can try either, let's go ahead and look at some Spark JIRA issues. How about
all right, so Holden, would you like me to try sharing my screen with you again, or rather having you share the screen, and should we try it that way, or shall I continue in the deck?
How about you share my screen and we see if it crashes?
Okay.
It'll be an exciting adventure for everyone.
It always is at a Lightbend webinar,
Oh yeah, no, keep it real fresh.
Okay, I'm making you presenter. I'm going to stop. My screen should now be off.
Okay. In theory, I have shared my screen.
It is visible.
I don't get it.
Oh.
But I can check the web for. I am sharing my screen.
Siri.
Did you rename Siri in theory?
I did not, but my thick Canadian accent can be difficult to understand at times.
Yeah, you need a Canadian phone, I think.
I do. I did make the mistake of buying this in America.
All right. Well, you're coming in loud and clear, and the screen looks good. So let's see how that goes.
Let's knock on at least wood, maybe. This could be wood. Anyways,
wood.
Okay, knocked on the wood. Sounds like my wife just woke up from sleeping behind me, so that's great. So yeah, this is the Apache JIRA. It contains all kinds of projects, not just Spark. And so we're going to go ahead and we're going to search for Spark. Okay, smart query activated. Don't worry about that. So this gives us all of the issues for Spark. That being said, we don't really care about all of the issues for Spark, right? We only care about things that are targeted to 3. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at target versions, and then we're going to say 3. Now, if you did want to help triage issues, you would probably look for things that didn't have a target version. But since we're mostly interested in seeing what's happening in Spark right now, sort of more for sure, we'll look at things that are targeted for 3. So we can see there's like small API improvements, things like making unpersist and destroy non-blocking by default. There's scale configurations, flaky tests, all sorts of normal things. Fixed core test for Java 11. So yeah, okay. So here's one of the things that we can see is this is called an SPIP, and that's sort of Spark's fancy improvement thing. And I don't actually remember what it stands for, but essentially it's our like, hey, this is a big change. We're not, super sure what we want to do here. This one is created December 18th. Okay, so this ticket tracks SPIP to improve model load time and model serving interfaces for serving the Spark ML models. And so if we scroll through this, we can see there's not like a lot of comments. And so let's, assign that like this is a big proposal, but it's not a big proposal that people are super excited about. So this could happen, but if I was betting, I probably wouldn't bet on us having ML model extension for online model serving happening in Spark 3, right? And so then we can keep scrolling through. And we can look for more interesting things. Let's go ahead and look for, we're going to add the text SPIP. Cool. Okay. So this is actually probably not super relevant to the Scala folks here at first glance, but it's actually kind of neat because this pandas UDF is actually probably one of the options for how we would integrate deep learning sort of into Spark is through Python with the pandas UDF, which is actually, I wish we called it an Arrow UDF, but I think people recognize pandas more than they recognized Arrow, and so we use the word pandas. And so actually, yeah, so we can see here, pandas UDF is the ideal connector between PySpark and deep learning model inferences workload. However, and okay, and then it talks about the challenges. It appears that I'm actually CC'd on this ticket, and I have not taken a look at it until today, but that's all right. Not a lot of comments, but the people who are commenting are mostly committers, and it relates to another SPIP one, which I think has more activity here. Yeah, and so this one has a lot more activity as well. And so this is kind of a I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this webinar, but I'll play it safe given what my boss told me. This is a sort of mediocre crystal ball, but we can get the idea that these are things that people are planning to work on. It's a little bit easier for me to glance at this and get the idea of what people are going to work on, because I recognize the names, like this person is a committer for sure. And so if a committer is like, yeah, this sounds kind of cool, that's a good sign that, if someone were to put in the time and come up with an implementation, there's a good chance that, we'll find a consensus around it. And so that's kind of cheating. But, if you were going through this yourself, building your own crystal ball, you could just search for the names and see if they were committers in Spark as well. And then there's some overlap with another issue as well. Okay, and so that's JIRA. All kinds of fun. I'm going to go back here. So we looked at JIRA. Yay, so much fun. Who likes doing code reviews? There is no.
Holden, would you like to attempt sharing your screen in presentation mode? And if that doesn't work, I'll flip back mine.
Oh, well, I was just going to go ahead and bring up the code review right now.
Oh, as you like.
If that's okay. Sorry. So, cool. Here's some Spark PRs. It's going to, I'm not signed in on this machine. Yeah, I don't normally run in Windows, hence this being a little slow. But so this is the Spark pull request view. If anyone's interested in helping review code, these are the different tabs that you can check on. In this case, we've been talking a little bit about Kubernetes, so let's go ahead and look at the Kubernetes PRs coming into Spark. So, we've got let Spark submit handle dependency resolution. This is the thing that I just did a live stream about. It looks good to me. It cleans up some code. We've got some sort of minor-ish changes. We've got support client dependencies with a compatible file system. And so that's one of the things we were talking about is, where dependencies are going to get uploaded. We've got someone talking about handling GPU Docker images, which is a thing that, we need to do to better support deep learning, but it's a little complicated on how we want to go ahead and do that. We can see Spark Streaming Compatibility Suite for Kubernetes. Right now, we don't have Spark Streaming Test Suite there. And then Spark R test coming in as well. And so we can see, things that are at the PR stage, they're a lot further along than things that are just in JIRA. But we can also take a look at these commenters thing. And if there's no commenters, well, that's not a great sign. But when there's a lot of people involved with the thing, it means it's a thing that a lot of people care about. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. for example, a lot of people might feel really strongly about not doing something and want to express that opinion. So you'd want to, click through and take a look. But I think, for example, this one is Kerberos support integration tests. I think a lot of people feel really strongly about us having better Kerberos integration tests. And so, yeah, there's a lot of comments. And anyways, that's, we could scroll through all of these, but that would probably take a really long time. Let's see. Yeah, it's changing 2,000 lines. So we're not actually going to go ahead and try and review this pull request just yet. Okay, so I really, if you know Scala, I would really love it if you came and joined us in doing code reviews. You don't have to be a Spark committer to review code. Many of the people who are commenting on these pull requests are not committers, and they have valuable input that can help the community move forward. Okay. I'm going to go back into presenter mode. Yay. It looks like this thing is just on top of it. Whatever. So really, that was also just a trick to try and get you involved, right? If you want to predict the future of an open source project, the easiest way to predict the future of an open source project is to be involved in the creation of it. And as much as I love code, it's really great. I love code contributions from folks. I really want a lot more help doing code reviews, right? We have 400 inbound pull requests. I'm not limited by the number of people willing to contribute code. I'm limited by the number of people who have the time to review code and help get those pull requests ready for inclusion into Spark. Or, review code and help people understand that it's a feature that might not be a great fit for Spark. Not everything's going to make it in. I would not be much of an author if I did not try and sell you my books. That's just more or less required. These are not all my books. These are just a fine collection of Spark books. I think they're all lovely and amazing, except for the one which I wrote out of date underneath. That one is my own, so I can say that about my own book. But I have this new book, High Performance Spark, and you can buy it today on the internet. It's amazing. They have books now. And it has absolutely nothing on Spark 3 because it doesn't exist. Spark 3, yeah. And cats love this book, I assure you, very much. If you're buying it for a cat, get the print edition. However, if you're buying it for a human, do get the ebook edition because I got roughly twice the royalties on that one, I think. So I think the ebook version has a lot better shelf life or something, or at least I earn 1/4 of a cup coffee on the ebook and probably only 1/8 of a cup of coffee on the print edition. Books are terrible economics. If you're interested, I've started a new project to try and teach distributed computing to children. I think it's fun. Normally when I tell people this, they think I'm joking. This is not a joke. It may not go super well, but I think that actually, distributed computing is an excellent way to introduce the concept of immutable data structures to ages 10 and up. And so if you have kids you'd like to teach distributed computing to, or if you'd just like to learn about distributed computing in a childlike fashion with pictures, then you can sign up for my mailing list at distributedcomputingforkids.com. Okay, if you want to come join me, I'll be at DataWorks Barcelona in March, Strata San Francisco, Kiwi Codemania, OSCON, and some other places. With that, I think it's Q&A time. This is my general okay, thanks, bye slide, but we can switch it back to Q&A if there are any questions.
Yeah, we've got a handful of questions here.
Yay!
Yeah. First of all, what do you have any information on an official roadmap or milestone release of Apache 3? Sorry, Spark 3.
Like people want to know when it's going to happen?
Yeah. Are there any dates out there in the world that people could learn about?
Sometimes if you search for the word roadmap in JIRA, you will find a roadmap. It looks like we do not have a public roadmap. And I mean, part of this is just doing a major release like this, it's really hard to predict timelines. We're finally getting a chance to get rid of a lot of our old APIs, but we need to be careful that we're not getting rid of things that people depend on really, really carefully. So it's going to be slower than normal. The normal Spark release cadence has been around, 4-ish months. And I would expect this release to take substantially longer than that. This is a guess, of course, but I would not plan to try and deploy. I would not plan to be waiting for Spark 3 if I wanted to build a new Spark application. I would just start using Spark 2.4 or building against master if I wasn't really planning on doing anything this year. Okay,
great. There's a bit of a complex question by one of the audience members about extending data frame APIs to allow transformation of complex nested data structures. And I think for the sake of time and expedience, maybe you could suggest where that person could find more information.
So, I mean, if this is a thing that you want to do today, you probably want to just look at using the dataset API. So what you'll do, so the data frame and dataset APIs are a little bit confusingly named and will sometimes be used interchangeably. Sometimes when people say data frame API, what they mean is the untyped version of the dataset API, because in new versions of Spark, the type data frame is just a type alias for dataset with blank type information. And if that's what you have, you probably want to try and convert it to strongly typed, and that is you want to write a case class for it, and you want to go ahead and use functional transformations on it. At that point, you lose some of the advantages of the Catalyst optimizer, but it allows you to do sort of pretty much anything you want, right? Because you're writing map expressions, you're not constrained by what you can easily express with the sort of raw dataset API. That would be my suggestion.
Okay, thanks. Do you know if there will be any more 2.x releases before 3.0?
Well, I think the releases that we'll see are maintenance releases. In fact, we're actually voting on a release right now. If you are a Spark user, one of the things that you can do to help is you can try your workload out on the current release candidate that's being discussed on the mailing list. And if it works, you can let us know. If it doesn't work, you can let us know too, so we don't break your Spark jobs. But I don't expect to see a Spark 2.5. Right now, the master branch, everything that's going in there is being tagged for Spark 3. We don't have a 2.5 in JIRA, right? If we look at these target versions here, 2.4. Oh, actually, we do have a 2.5. Is anything targeted to 2.5? Let's take a look. We have a bunch of stuff. Okay, there's a chance. All of these things are being tagged as fixed in 3 rather than fixed in 2.5. So I guess there is certainly a possibility. Oh, wait, no, sorry. I added 2.5, but I didn't take out 3. Let's take out 3. Yeah, okay, there's nothing tagged for 2.5. So yeah, I don't see 2.5 coming. We do have a tag in JIRA for it. I guess if we changed our mind and Spark 3 started taking a really, really long time, there's a chance that we might do a Spark 2.5, but I think that's unlikely. I'd be willing to bet one person a cup of coffee on us not doing a Spark 2.5 release.
Okay, that sounds fair.
But one specific person, you have to reach out to me by email.
Okay.
Like, I'm not made of money.
So the final question that we've got for tonight is quite a unique one. I congratulate the person who asked it. it reads, "Hi Holden, if you would be the only decision maker on which feature you would add to Spark and spend all of your effort on it, what would it be?"
Oh, that's a great question. That is, that's a really good question. Well, I think probably if it was just me, I would work on doing a really solid Arrow integration because I think that's really a lot of Spark's future lives in playing well together with other members of the big data ecosystem. And I think no longer are files the acceptable interchange. I think for Spark, if we want to survive long term, we need to be able to do in-memory cooperation with other tools. That's in a hypothetical world where it's just me. But good question. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting one. We don't usually see questions like that come through. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. That's all the time we have. Holden, thank you so much for making the time, and despite some early challenges getting connected and everything, it was excellent to have you as our special guest today.
I'm really glad it worked out.
Again, thank you all for joining us.